One of the books I was reading recently, which I just wanted to share, was Influenced by Robert Cialdini. This book was recommended in the book Get Smarter by Seymour Schulich, and I've been finding it really interesting so far. The most interesting point is basically this idea he proposes that animals have, when they're studying animals, they find that animals have triggers that cause them to do a set series of actions. And he expresses this like you're playing a tape. For humans, we also have similar triggers, although the interactions are a bit more complex, and there's also a bit of social pressure related into that rather than just evolutionary pressure. So it's really interesting though, because he talks about this idea of we have trigger words. So one of them he says is the word because. That's one of our trigger words. And he said that this example I just thought was really interesting. He said that somebody trying to skip the line for a copy machine, when they said, "Excuse me, I only have 5 pages and I'm in a rush," or "I only have 5 pages, can I skip the line because I'm in a rush?" And a large percentage of people allowed them to. That makes sense, right? Small amount of pages, they're in a rush, whatever. Then, when just saying, "Excuse me, can I skip the line? I only have 5, or excuse me, I only have 5 pages, can I skip the line?" Compliance was lower, which kind of makes sense. They didn't give a reason, so less compliance. And then they tried this again, and they gave a fake reason. They said, "Excuse me, I only have 5 pages, can I skip the line because I need to photocopy something?" And obviously they were trying to photocopy something, and compliance was back to being really high. So what he proposed, and I'm not sure if this study actually proposed this, but what he proposed based on this study is that we have trigger words such as the word because. Because is a trigger word partially because we all like a reason, but because in and of itself increases compliance to things. So I thought that was really interesting because you can imagine how that can be used against you, and even how you can use that information to make your arguments a little bit more appealing, essentially. Although, obviously, one of the bigger ones is how do we make sure that we ourselves don't get tricked by things like that. And he talked about a few other things. So there's a couple of principles, such as the contrast principle, which is basically, let's say in a negotiation, someone proposes to you a really big thing, and then they propose to you a much smaller thing. The smaller thing seems smaller than it actually is. This works in the opposite way too. When somebody proposes you a really small thing, and then they propose you a really big thing, the really big thing seems way bigger than it is. Or let's say a big thing, it seems really big because you saw the small thing first. And apparently salespeople actually use this tactic when they're trying to sell, when they have stores where there's an assortment of goods. So an easy example is clothing, and Robert Cialdini gave this example in his book, which I also thought was really interesting because I was trying to buy a suit the other day. He said that suit salesmen are more successful, and a lot of suit salesmen do this because they're more successful doing it, if they introduce a very expensive suit, or they at least sell the suit first before the accessories. And the reason for that is because when you buy the really expensive thing and you're looking at expensive suits, then when you go to buy accessories, your average total order amount is actually higher because the accessories, let's say it's a sweater, a $100 sweater seems a lot cheaper now that you've bought a $600, $500, $400 suit, whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting how that contrast principle can really skew how we're thinking, even though we think that we're thinking logically. We think that, oh, I can buy that tie that's really expensive. It doesn't seem like that much, but it doesn't seem like that much because we just bought that way more expensive suit. And the final thing, which I think is one of the most interesting and one of the most powerful, is the principle of reciprocity. And that basically was that when you do something towards someone else, then they have a social pressure essentially to do it back to you. And this works in a couple of ways. So one of them can be a favor. If you give a favor to somebody, then they have a pressure to give a favor back to you, to pay it back. Okay, that makes sense. That's easy. What's interesting is this also works in terms of concessions. So Robert Cialdini talks a lot about this idea of, I can't remember how he exactly called it now, but basically it's this idea of where you propose a big thing and then you make a concession to a smaller thing. And what's really crazy about that is that people, one, are obviously more likely to comply with the concession because a concession is to be met with a concession based on how reciprocity works, which is reciprocity is basically a rule across all societies. But what's really interesting is they're also more likely to feel good about the deal they made because they feel like they had control in the other person making a concession. So you can kind of see how this could be used against you by salespeople, where a salesperson, and this is one of the big focuses of the book, but where a salesperson proposes something big to you, then they're making concession to something small, but the small thing's what they wanted the whole time. So really interesting in kind of having that knowledge to try to think about ways to avoid it being used on you. I just thought it was kind of mind-blowing, some of the stuff, and almost how robotic we are. Even though we think we're so logical, we think that we're so smart. So anyways, I'm only about halfway into the book. Highly recommend. The book is Influence by Robert Cialdini.